This is the Menopause Movement Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Gordon. Now, here at the Menopause Movement, we've surveyed over 50,000 menopausal women. And through this, we've discovered that the number one cause of menopausal suffering for our clients is weight gain. Now, you've said things like, how do I lose the menobelly? I don't recognize myself anymore. How can I get me back? When menopause hit me out of the blue, I had no idea what was happening. And when I gained about 50 pounds overnight, I hated what I saw in the mirror. The menopause movement exists to provide world-class transformational education to women who are suffering from the symptoms and effects of menopause. And we're here to give you the education you need to get your life back. We want menopause to be the best time of your life. I mean, it is for me, and I want that for you. After years of trial and error, I finally cracked the code with my menopause weight. And now I want to share with you how I did it. I realized that what helped me the most was a challenge. So we've created a challenge for you to help you lose your menobelly. Simply go to menopausemovement.com/challenge to sign up. I'll see you there. What's up, everyone? Before we get started, I wanted to give you an update. Remember a few episodes ago when Lucy Seligman was on and I was complaining of this frozen shoulder on my left side? Well, I'm happy to report that after that episode, I braved another shot in the arm, so to speak, and I went to about 15 physiotherapy sessions. And the end result is I have a 90 to 95% function of this arm without any pain. So isn't that awesome? I'm so excited that I was able to do that. And so I just wanted to give you that update. So anyway, today we welcome Kathleen Finlay to the podcast. She's the president of a local not-for-profit farm called Glynwood. And I've learned a lot about farming and the importance of regional cuisine from her. She's a leading educator in the small farm movement here in New York. And she's been a leader in the regenerative agriculture movement for most of her career. She's also been instrumental in organizing women who want to work for environmental progress. Since arriving at Glynwood in 2012, she has refined the organization's mission and become a national figure in the world of progressive agricultural nonprofits. Under her leadership, Glynwood has become a premier learning hub for food and farming professionals. Previously, Kathleen was a director of Harvard's Center for Health and the Global Environment, where she developed and shaped programs to educate communities about the correlation between human health and the global environment. She created a farm-friendly food policy for dining services and produced a comprehensive online guide to nutritional, seasonal eating and cooking in the Northeast. She also co-founded the Harvard Community Garden, the university's first garden dedicated solely to the production of food, produced 2 award-winning documentaries, Once Upon a Tide and Healthy Humans, Healthy Oceans, and co-authored the book Sustainable Healthcare by Wiley in 2013. She also founded Pilates, a membership organization working to advance women's leadership in the sustainability movement. She holds a degree in biology from UC Santa Cruz and a Master of Science in journalism from Boston University. She's authored numerous reports and publications and acts as an advisor to various environmental and community organizations, including Congressman Sean Patrick Maloney's Agricultural Advisory Board and Senator Kirsten Gillibrand's Agricultural Working Group. If you've ever wondered what a CSA is or how to get more local produce into your diet, this episode is definitely for you. During the podcast, we talk about Kathleen's experience with menopause, how she came to New York, what is regional cuisine, the importance of community in developing regional cuisine, the role a CSA plays in regional cuisine, where you are, where I am, GMO crops versus hybridized crops, regional cuisine in the Hudson Valley specifically, our health and how it benefits from whole, real regional food, asking for help to complete any project, especially as a woman, and what that means. And stay to the end to find out the role women play in the national regional food movement. At the end of the episode, visit menopausemovement.com/blog, where you can find the show notes plus the links to the books and resources mentioned in the episode. And if you enjoy the episode, be sure to leave a written review, like and subscribe on YouTube, and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts so you're always the first to know when each episode is released. And hey, I want to know, what's your biggest menopause struggle? Let me know on Instagram at Dr. Michelle Gordon or on Facebook, also at Dr. Michelle Gordon. And thanks again for being a part of the menopause movement. Now let's get to Kathleen. All right, Kathleen Finlay, welcome to the Menopause
Thanks.
Movement podcast. I'm so happy to have you here.
I'm so happy to be here. Finally.
So just as a little bit of background, so I've known Kathleen for, I want to say about 7-8 years. And she's in charge of this regional farm that we support, and she's going to tell you more about it. But meeting Kathleen it just really changed my life, not only in the way of the type of food that we get and the CSA from her farm, but more along understanding what's locally available and how to have more of that in my life, and just the options. And the other thing is that Glynwood is such a beautiful place. And every time I drive in there, it's just like this feeling of peace just kind of comes down on me with the rolling hills and it's just beautiful. So welcome.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here talking with you.
So this is the Menopause Movement podcast. And so the first thing I want to find out from you is, let's talk a little bit about your menopause experience and how maybe food played a role for you.
Yeah. I mean, let's use the present tense. It's happening right now as we speak. So I'm sort of perimenopausal. My periods are starting to get irregular and heavy and all of that fun stuff.
Right.
And so far, not a ton of symptoms, but it does feel like, I'm like consuming all this information, including your amazing work, trying to be as informed as I can as I go through this pretty dramatic process, and how I'm just constantly amazed that we spend so much time talking about adolescence and adolescence for women in particular. And then it's like, yeah, you're going to go through this other huge hormonal shift and chapter change and life change, but we don't really talk about it that much.
Yeah, it's like this secret society that no one's talking about. And and that's the reason why we have the menopause movement.
Yeah.
More than anything else, is just like, let's break the silence and start talking about it and make it better, make life better.
Yeah. But I feel like for any kind of disruption, the key to resilience is, going in feeling strong and good. So I do feel like in general, how you eat is one of, as the most important indicators of how you feel and your health. And, I feel strong going into this change.
Yeah, that's good.
And then I can't wait to get to the other side.
That's so like I tell this story of like when I first, when menopause started hitting me, and it was such a big disruption, and I had no idea what was going on. And when I started, I had, my periods had kind of stopped, and I had spent many years not having a period on purpose, because I got like really weird when I had periods. And so then when I took the hormones, I got a period, and I was like, I would rather deal with bad moods than get that, But the problem is that there just isn't a lot of education out there. And so that's what the menopause movement is for. And it's, there's more coming out, but the whole idea is to talk about it. So you're working through that now, but let's talk a little bit about your background. Like, how did you come to Glynwood, and where were you before?
Yeah. My interest in this work stems from a deep love of the natural world, actually. I grew up in California. I spent a lot of time outside in nature, and that created a sense of wonder in me around the natural world. And then I wanted to study biology and really understand how the natural world works, and then started learning about all the ways that we depend on nature for our health and well-being, and the threats to nature, and that means threats to us. So that led me to kind of an interesting path of ocean conservation and an initiative around ocean and human health in my maternal home of Bermuda. My mother was born and raised in Bermuda. And from there, that led me to Harvard Medical School, where I was working at a center that was founded by physicians who were using the voice of the medical community to bring awareness to how the impacts to the natural world ultimately affect our own health and well-being. And I was there for a long time, and that work was awesome. We looked at how the loss of biodiversity is affecting human health, how climate change is affecting human health. And I started really focusing on the connections between food, health, and the environment because I eat. And eating is such a fundamental connection to the natural world that as a communicator, it felt like, that everybody can relate to how we eat, and we can start to think about how what we eat depends on nature and the threats to that, to those ecosystems ultimately affect us through food.
I remember when I lived in California and I drove up to Northern California for something, to go visit somebody, or drove through there on my way to Washington or something. And I remember just seeing miles and miles and miles of farmland and thinking, this is how we get fed.
Yeah.
And I grew up in the 80s, and now, you think about like some of the changes that are happening in farming now, where everything's going small again. Back in the 80s, all the little farms were getting eaten up by corporations. And it's interesting because I liken what happened in the 80s to farms to what's happening to medicine now.
Right.
And you see all this consolidation in medicine and how there's almost no small practices anymore. And I had a small practice and I've closed it. And that's mostly because of corporations coming in and taking over and kind of putting their corporate will on us. And that happened in farming. And I remember it was so disruptive to the people who were, they couldn't make a living. And so then they'd lose their farms because the margin was so small. And now what you do at Glynwood is you teach people like how to farm, and you're involved with the seed bank and all those things. And if anybody who is listening to this podcast or watching this podcast on YouTube is a big foodie, this is a good episode for you, mostly because when you think about regional cuisine, I think when I watched that Mind of a Chef on Netflix with the guy who was in like Carolinas, and they'd brought beans from Africa, and they were talking about, have you seen that one?
I haven't seen that one.
Yeah. But it just made me think about all the work we're doing at Glynwood. And so I guess this is a good segue for us to talk about let's just define what is regional cuisine and why is it important to us?
Yeah. And that reality that you describe in the 80s is really apt. And that reality is all through the Midwest, of course, these big, homogenous, large tracts of land controlled by very few companies, whether you're talking about seed companies or aggregating companies or processing companies. That is still very much a reality. And what we're trying to do at Glynwood is create a much more decentralized system, which is what you're describing as the before, where what's possible, what's most important to us at Glynwood and to me personally is sovereignty. So we talk a lot about food sovereignty at Glynwood, and what does it mean for all of us? And that there's a foodie element to that, but it's actually way deeper in terms of like social justice. So what does it mean to have a region have a say in their foodscape? What does that look like? How do we create that? It's certainly really hard to do in the conventional system that's controlled by very few, typically guys who are after a profit. It's much easier to do in the system we're trying to build here in the Hudson Valley, where you have smaller farms. They're in direct communication with their consumers. They're hearing what those consumers want. They're able in many ways to grow things. Like today, I belong to one of our participants in one of our farm business incubator programs. Choi Division grows Asian vegetables, mostly for Asian communities in New York City. And there's an Indian CSA. That's the kind of vibrancy and celebration of culture and of food sovereignty that we want to see here in the Hudson Valley. So a regional cuisine for me is certainly defined by what grows well in your neck of the woods. For us, that's in the Hudson Valley of New York. But it's also deeper than that culturally. It's that there's a community voice in what that foodscape is, and a seat at the table to help define that cuisine. And that's really exciting.
So when you talk about having regional cuisine, right, I think about, what is American food? And when I think about American food, it's like hot dogs and hamburgers and apple pie. And that's what the world thinks American food is. And, our version of pizza and all this stuff that isn't real food.
Yeah.
I suppose, you have good grass-fed beef, then you can make a hamburger with that, right? Hot dogs are usually not good cuts of meat, and not something that we should be eating like probably ever.
Yeah.
But they are also things that, so I don't know that America has a claim to our regional food. And so how do you create identity with that? Because, you think about the Italians, Mediterranean, and, even go so far as Israelis and the, hummus and the Middle Eastern food and falafel, and that you can go anywhere in New York City and get regional food.
Mm-hmm.
But it might not be New York City food.
Right.
It might be Indian food, or it might be Asian food, So what's the answer here?
Yeah. I think Americans have an interesting identity crisis in general, right? So, and what's beautiful in my view about this country is that there's folks from all over the world who are part of our society. And that hodgepodge of cuisine is like nowhere else in the world. Like, it's hard to get some of the cuisines you just mentioned in regions that kind of are true to their heritage. So I think that's to be amplified and celebrated, and part of the identity of an American cuisine, that it is made up of all kinds of inherited and transported, migrated cultures. For the Hudson Valley in particular, or for different regions, certainly there's a California cuisine, fresh, beautiful, seasonal, close to harvest, healthy, clean. That's like, that's great. And then you can take any spin on that you want, but that's certainly there. And I think the Hudson Valley and other regions, southern regions are moving in that direction, starting with what grows really, really well there. But it's ever evolving. We're just about to launch a program here at Glynwood that is going to foster local production of grains and staples. Traditionally, we've gotten our grains and beans and stuff from other parts of the country. So what does a New York-based grains and staples look like? And some of that is experimentation. What grains grow well here? What kind of bread should we be eating that's emblematic of the Hudson Valley, that's different than what you're going to get in the plains of the Midwest? So that's really exciting.
Well, I grew up in Washington State, and we would drive to see my grandparents, and there were always wheat fields on the way from where I grew up in southeastern Washington State, and then to where they lived, which was on the border of Idaho. And my dad would, drive us and stop, and we'd take wheat kernels and eat them. And, that was before Monsanto and Roundup Ready, anything. And now, I haven't been back there in many years, but, the thought of, I've never seen a wheat field in New York. Now, that's not saying, and there might be some up north, but I've never seen a wheat field. I've seen a lot of apples.
Yeah. It's coming. They're there. And I think there's great interest in doing more. And actually, the Pacific Northwest is a great example of a region that has reclaimed wheat production recently. And Oregon State has some awesome work that we're partnering with and replicating here in New York. And they have a great lab where bakers and tasters can experiment with different grains and create beautiful food. I guess there is a stereotype of the hamburger is such a great symbol of everything that's wrong with an American diet, basically, from the typical white bread that's been pumped full of God knows what, that it really doesn't even come close to what whole wheat bread is, to the ketchup, which is basically just red sugar, to the meat patty, which is 9 times out of 10 going to come from a confined animal feeding operation and like mass produced meat. It's like, if you can kind of take every part of that and think about why we as a country need to rethink food in many ways and embrace some of the wonderful work that's being done, and because of Glynwood, but because of other regions who are part of this good food movement.
Yeah, we have a lot of listeners in California and Texas, and the one thing would be if we could give them some resources for where, their local areas, like what, how they can find regional cuisine or at least, farms that are small.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the best ways to participate in your local food movement is by joining a CSA. And CSA stands for Community Supported Agriculture. And typically how a CSA works is you buy in one lump sum, you subscribe to a season, and then you're really a shareholder, essentially. You're an investor in that farm. The farmer is psyched because they get the cash when they need it, which is in the off season. So they use that to buy their tools and their equipment and labor, and they know how much income they're going to have throughout so it's a pretty simple business model. Works really well, especially for new entry farmers just getting into business. And then each week, typically, you get your share, the return on your investment. You get part of the harvest. And so there's websites where you can find your local CSA, and they have drop-offs in cities. So it's not like you have to live next door to your farm. There's plenty of drop-offs in New York City and San Francisco and Boston and Austin. And the health benefits of that have not been studied thoroughly, but the few studies that have been done are pretty impressive. Like doctor visits cut in half after just one season.
Wow.
Co-payments of medication, especially for diet-related illnesses, significant drop. So you're sort of, you're put on basically a local regional diet. And it does a couple of things. One, you're going to eat more fruits and vegetables. Those studies have been done. That's pretty easy. The interesting work, this is the work of Jennifer Wilkins at Cornell, is that I learned is that the numbers of fruits and vegetables is important, obviously, but actually the diversity of those fruits and vegetables is important. So if you're eating tons of broccoli every day and you might be hitting your servings, you're just getting what broccoli can give you. So the spectrum you get through CSA as a season unfolds, and this is just for vegetables, can be really beneficial. So that's her interesting work. And now there's all kinds of CSAs. Like I said, I belong to some that specialize in certain vegetables, but you can do a meat CSA, you can do dairy CSAs, grain CSAs, cheese CSAs.
Yeah. Well, it is a really great business model because you're just going to pay for it and then you're going to get whatever gets produced. It's also a small risk if the farm fails, but that just goes with the place, right?
Yeah, it's the risk, or you get you're in it with the farmer. Exactly. Yeah. So, we had an awesome year last year, and the actual price per share was way higher because we put some deer fencing up. We didn't have as many pests, and our farmers are getting more savvy. And so you actually was a win for the customer. Doesn't always happen.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because with COVID, we've seen a rise in home farming, and I was the first one on my block to have a front yard farm, not farm, but, a little garden patch.
Yeah.
And when it went up, and that was back in, I want to say March of 2014, and I already had a pretty successful plot in the back. And so we put one in the front because it has full sun. My next door neighbor came to me and said, move it. And I'm like, no.
Wow.
Yeah. I said, this is food. I said, I can take my lawn and turn it into food if I want, and it's okay. And I don't have to answer to you or anyone else. We don't have a homeowners association. And now I've seen multiple farms, garden patches or plots or vegetable plots in others, in my neighborhood. And I was the first to do it. And so they were up in arms. I mean, apparently they went around to people in the neighborhood and wanted me to do something about it. And I just laughed at them. Like, no, I mean, because it's a pretty big, it's like 12 by 6 feet or something. I mean, it's not a small thing. And he's like, well, can you move it? I'm like, no, I'm not going to move
you.
It. I mean, geez.
Yeah. I mean, that's
the gall of the neighbor.
Right. And then I've heard stories of people doing that, and, they end up having like a mini CSA. Like people come and pay the homeowner to pick their tomatoes for the afternoon so it's just interesting that, it reminds me of when we first started working on putting a garden in Harvard, on Harvard's campus. There was some pushback about what that would look like, what that would feel like, would people just come in and pick it, and now it's like a shining, they love the garden. It's like beautiful and people are psyched. So it's hard to be that pioneer, but I'm glad you did it.
what makes me think, it makes me think about change, right? And change is always hard. And, you think about the Eiffel Tower. When the Eiffel Tower went up, it was this big, ugly thing that nobody wanted. I mean, it was a lot of controversy, and it was supposed to come down. And now it is the iconic symbol of Paris. And so it's just change is one of those things that people always want to keep things the same because that's what the way our brains work.
Yeah.
But oftentimes change is better.
Yeah. And what a year of change. So you talk about the pandemic, how it inspired people to grow more, which is so fabulous. And that's absolutely true. It also inspired people to find their local farms. So the farmers that we work with throughout the Hudson Valley had more customers than they've ever had. And it was a record-breaking year last year, and it looks like this year. And, I think my theory is it introduced people to their local regional food shed, and then taste takes it from there. Because there's no comparison in terms of eating fresh, whether you grew it yourself or you're getting it the day after from a farm. The taste will make that change, quicker and swifter. And so I think we captured a lot of folks just for them, from their perspective, trying to avoid supermarkets and worried about a supply chain. They just scrambled to find their local farm, but we got them now.
Yeah, that's great. That's really great. So let's talk for a second about GMO and what is your view on GMO. And I want to say that there are something, and I just want to preface it with this. There's a rice that has some needed nutrient in it. And that's golden a GMO. Rice. Yeah, that's a GMO that is probably good. But then we have a lot of, this Roundup Ready stuff that, supposedly has Roundup built into the genetics of the wheat, say, or the soy. And that might be why people can eat wheat in Europe, but not in America.
Oh, in terms of their own tolerance?
Yeah.
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 Yeah, I'm not a fan. That'll come as no surprise to you, Michelle.
Right.
Yeah. And I think for some listeners, I was just asked this on a panel last night, and there's confusion about hybridization, conventional hybridization, and GMO. And so what we're talking about is actually genetically modifying an organism. And what that means is that those products are then owned by a company. So just want to be clear on that part of it. Those are patented processes. So if I make an awesome tasting carrot through conventional hybridization, that's not GMO. That's just making a new kind of carrot, right, through conventional work. And that's great. We want new carrots. We want new varieties. So what you just talked about in terms of Roundup Ready, for example, I feel like there's 3 areas of concerns. One, which you just pointed out, is how does our human bodies deal with that? And I think there's some work that is concerning, but I think the far more concern for me is the unintended consequences that has in the natural world. So what does that do to the pollinators, for example? We know so little about pollinators and how they are instrumental to fertilization in the natural world. And so as we control down to the genetics of large growing fields of these products, what consequences did that have with how that plant interacts with the rest of nature? We don't know the answer to that. And so that concerns me. And then the thing that I think concerns me the most is the patent process and the ownership of those products, because what that means is you can't seed save from a genetically modified plant. So you're constantly every year going back to the company for their patented product. So it's a little borders on some kind of almost like serfdom. I mean, I think that's extreme, but you're sort of totally beholden to this company that owns the thing you're growing. And then if it turns out you need to pair the thing you're growing with the other thing the company is producing, you're like buying completely from that company. And so this sort of capitalistic driven ownership of plants that a farmer is growing out for the company, that system really scares me. Yeah. It's the opposite of food sovereignty, actually. So who has a voice at that table? Not me as an eater living next door to that farm. So that's my take on GMOs currently is more the kind of the financial and capital aspects of it.
Yeah. I mean, well, I've also heard stories of, one farmer laying down seeds from a GMO, and then, or maybe they've leased the land from that company, whatever. And then the seeds have blown onto somebody else's farm. And then that farmer was charged like with stealing or with, or having to pay but they never planted that. And I don't know what the outcome was of that, but it does seem, I mean, there's a lot of unfairness that happens, I think, especially in food, and we don't have to worry about it. A lot of people just don't have to worry about food supply here in America because it's just, you just go to the store and get it and it's there. And it's just not something we think about. And that's something I think we could probably start to change. Like, where is your food coming from? And can we get our stuff more regionally? And so with that, let's just talk for a second about your vision for what's going to happen in the Hudson Valley, the regional view for what your dream is there.
Yeah. My dream for the Hudson Valley is just that, something you just mentioned. So it's a region defined by food, where food is sort of paramount to the sense of place, the culture, the connection to land, and is recognized nationally as a place of bounty for good food. And really a place where that level of food sovereignty is felt, not only in terms of the farmers having being able to make a living wage and being able to get access to land, but also for the eaters to have a sense of a voice in their own foodscape. So that's the grocery store that you just referenced. We can all go to, but the decisions about what's in that grocery store lie with a handful of people. That are also making those decisions based on their bottom lines, not necessarily thinking about the eaters in a community and their health, right?
Right.
If you contrast that with the vision that I see for the Hudson Valley, where there's more direct connection with your farmers and your farmland, where you have a voice to say, I remember having Asian greens growing up that my grandmother made. Have you ever grown this? And then the next season, there they are in your CSA, where there's a sense of health and wellness and access to that kind of food. So we are thinking a lot about how do folks who aren't privileged and don't have resources to buy food that isn't cheap have access to the kind of food system that we're talking about, which is inherently more expensive. And we think a lot about that these days, and we're setting up mechanisms to be able to help farmers produce food for folks that are food insecure and that have limited resources, and to be able to have resources that help with CSA subscriptions to make them more affordable and have the payments not be one lump sum and all kinds of things like that. So when I think about the Hudson Valley of the future, I see it retaining its legacy of small farms that are viable businesses led by stewards of those lands that care deeply about the soil and the land that they're regenerating, and that are part of a region that takes a lot of pride and feels a sense of ownership and voice in the food that region produces.
Yeah, that's really great. And just to have access to that kind of food. And you have I know just a couple of years ago, you had some sort of an initiative where people on Medicaid could get your CSA.
It's not Medicaid. It's we use people that have food assistance dollars. They're called SNAP dollars.
Okay.
So they can pay for their CSA with those SNAP dollars. And that the mechanism for that is that you only get your SNAP dollars from the federal government in installments over the year. So that one early lump sum that I talked about is difficult. So we simply created a mechanism where we pay the farmer up front Glynwood does, through a fund. And then as the SNAP dollars come in, it replenishes the fund. So it just makes it easier for folks to be able to have that subscription without the farmer missing out on that early payment.
That's really great. Now, let's say somebody here goes out and gets a CSA and, they've got something in there that they don't know how to cook. How do you, because that was a problem that we had.
Yeah.
Was that, we were getting things like turnips and rutabagas and stuff that we didn't normally eat. And so how do you address that obstacle?
Yeah. So we've, by building a coalition of CSA farms here in the Hudson Valley, and that's replicated in other regions, pulling together the farms that use this kind of distribution method. We created, for example, a magazine that's distributed with your CSA share. And every magazine has like, what the hell do I do with a rutabaga or whatever? And there's recipe cards, and there's how to store it, and there's cooking demos online. So we try to, I think but I want to say that for any individual farm to be able to provide those resources, that's really hard. They're farming. They're out there farming. They're not marketers. They're not recipe developers, right? They're not, putting together graphic design recipe cards. But by pulling 100 or 150 farms together and the Glynwood resources, we are able to produce information and resources for CSA customers that we distributed through all of those CSAs. That's so great. And, I do think you have to have a certain amount of joy and play and curiosity with a CSA to want to learn. And then once you do, so funny because you say turnips and I'm like, I kind of remember my first CSA with turnips in it and being like, what do I do? But now turnips are like, oh my God, turnips so easy. It's just you just slice it up and put it in a salad. It's like everybody goes bananas about it. So you start to learn, and then they become all you can pull it out of a hat. Like I'll deal with a turnip or a rutabaga any day. Mash is really good.
Right. I know. Those are just a couple of vegetables that not everybody eats every day. We all know what to do with a potato and, because they're just so ubiquitous. So we know that eating better affects our health. We know this, right? And we talk about this a lot at the menopause movement, that food is your medicine. This comes back from Hippocrates way, way, way back. And the biggest question I have, and I think that anyone who does primary care, so the doctors or maybe nurse practitioners who do primary care, how can they help their patients in understanding regional cuisine and then maybe kind of getting them off medicine?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that the food as medicine and food and health movement has been really successful in getting one on the same kind of basic page, right? Mm-hmm. Just as you say, healthy food creates health. And that's true. It would be hard for me to argue that if you lived in New York and you bought all of your vegetables from Whole Foods and they were grown in California and you ate, a really plant-based diet, that those health outcomes wouldn't be as good as mine, for example, where I eat pretty much almost all locally. But I think that the benefits come from a couple of different things. One is the freshness of the food that you're eating, so that does have more nutrients and is better for you. Another is sort of that spectrum as the season unfolds that I talked about, those diversity of fruits and vegetables. But a lot of it is about pleasure and joy and community and place. I don't discount those for things like health and wellness. I think that makes a big difference. When people come, and I see customers come up and pick up their CSA, sometimes they'll have their kids in tow. They're looking at this head of lettuce that was just picked. It's gorgeous. It looks almost like a rose, right? It has like a dark center with the green leaves unfolding. The kids are loving it. They want to eat it. They want to take part in it. The farmer's right there talking about it. That is a different experience. And the fact that CSAs are just as affordable as going to the grocery store is also a big difference in that you can have that experience and it doesn't cost any more to have that very special experience.
I think that's really good. So I think the big take home point here is that you join a CSA, you're going to get fresher vegetables and it's not any more expensive than going to the store to get, farm grown stuff from California or Peru or, wherever. So that's something to really think about.
And I mean, if people don't want to play with all of the stuff you get in a CSA, there's other, farmers markets are great ways to tap into your local food scene. Again, have increased during the pandemic because people felt more safe outside at a farmer's market than in the grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
Finding out where your local farms are, and if they have farm stores, most farms do, and just patronizing them that way. So there's other ways to get, really great local food without signing up for a CSA. And, if you just Google wherever you are and farms and CSA, you're going to find your local farms.
Right. And farmers markets have been around for a long time. I mean, there's usually a farmer's market on a Saturday morning all through the growing season, and sometimes even outside the growing season because because of technology.
But I think for the physicians and healthcare providers who are giving advice to their patients, a CSA prescription is not a bad idea. I mean, again, there haven't been very many studies done, but it's pretty compelling. People going off heart disease medication after a couple seasons because it becomes part of your life. And change is hard, as you said. It's hard to kind of embrace that but it's also can be fun and exciting and something you share with your family. What do I do with this? Watch the video, pull out the cookbook.
Right.
Here we are, we're doing this thing. And, as when those folks start to reap the benefits of health, pretty compelling.
Yeah, no, that's true. And just eating more, whole real food is going to change your life. When you stop the seed oils and when you stop the, a lot of the sugars that are, kind of snuck into our food, then that starts to make you feel amazing. And I talk about this a lot. I talk about, how seed oils are probably the culprit when it comes to the diabetes epidemic here in America. It's that and sugar, but seed oils especially. I mean, I've had Kate Shanahan on the podcast, and I don't know if you know who she is, but she wrote a book called Deep Nutrition, another one called The Fat Burn Fix, and she's been on the podcast a couple of times. And it's just so important to realize that there are full-on branches of science that are just there to make soybean oil safer for humans. So just don't eat it. I mean, it's not safe. Vegetable oil is not safe.
I think this is right. I'm going to say that I'm not 100% this is right, but it is something like 60% of the food that is produced in this country ends up as ultra processed food.
Yeah.
With just a ton of stuff in it.
Right.
So just switching from, that packaged, branded, and it also gets back to this, it's just eat real food. You can't put a logo on it. That's the other joy of going to your farm. It's like, it's honest. It's honest stuff.
That's true.
Yeah.
Well, we're planting right now in our 2 garden plots, and
awesome.
We've just planted some nasturtium, and it tastes a little like pepper. I was pretty happy with that. That was pretty exciting. And when we went to Noma several years ago, in like 2014, when Noma is one of the top-rated restaurants in the world. It was number 3 when we went there, and they had nasturtium like all over. There was nasturtium all over that, and I'd never had it before, and so now we have nasturtium, and we also have some lemon thyme, which I'd never had before. And that is delicious.
Delicious.
I was super happy with that. So I'm super excited about that. We've got strawberries. Yeah. We've got an artichoke growing.
Great. Oh, that's fun. Those are hard.
A bunch of lettuce. Yeah.
The nasturtiums grow wild in Bermuda everywhere. So it's like part of their cuisine to have. I mean, I typically have them in my salads. You just toss them in for that little bit of that peppery, spicy stuff. So it's always fun to see them at like restaurants where it's like kind of fancy, but they grow so easily, right?
Yeah.
They don't take a lot of,
Yeah, they don't. Well, yeah, you're right. They don't. They're just easy to grow. But
yeah,
I'm thinking about regional cuisine, and when I lived in California, there were pepper trees just lining the block, and rosemary everywhere.
Yeah,
everywhere, just rosemary bushes.
Yeah, I just had a conversation with, this is great for your listeners, Ethan Frisch, who developed a spice company called Burlap and Barrel. Glynwood's done a bunch of work with him because he sources spices globally, but has the same lens of equity and sustainability and just food that we bring to regional food. So it's like, obviously no one's 100% regional. You want some of the stuff that we can't grow here to be trickled through your meals. And but he was telling, I was asking him about spices in the Hudson Valley, and he was saying that sumac grows everywhere, and sumac is a fantastic additive to almost any dish. So I'm gonna try and harvest some sumac. He says it grows all over New York City, actually.
Wow. Yeah. I know about poison sumac. That grows all over California.
Yeah. No, I think this is a different. It's a berry. I'm going to find out more about it.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. But just be careful with sumac, people, because there is a poison role, a poison version. Okay. So let's talk. The last thing that you have here on your outline is what role women play in shaping a food system that works the way we want it to and not the way it has been. So how do we empower more women? I mean, women pretty much, the thing I like to say about women is, we may run the world, but we still live inside of a patriarchy. And so how can we as women get our voices and make things happen?
Yeah. I mean, that is one of my primary interests, my time here on this planet. So what's interesting about the food movement is that unlike some other sectors, there are a lot of women leading the effort. And I don't know why that is, whether it's a direct connection with food and women often provide food in households, or that there was some pioneers in the field that were women that got some attention. I'm thinking of Alice Waters and Frances Moore Lapay. But there are a lot of women in leadership in this movement. And that is fantastic. For example, if you compare that with the environmental sector or the natural world conservation sector, it's starkly different. That sector has been historically and continues to be led by white men. So that's one of the reasons that I love working in this sector, is because I see leadership in my gender. And one of the things that I've done with my time is I created a network of women leaders who address issues of sustainability, not just food and agriculture. And we did that because we didn't see leadership in our sector, that folks who looked like us. Tons of women working, but none of the leaders. And so what we spend time doing is resourcing each other. What do you need? How can I help you? What is your big dream? How can we get that done? How can we work together to get that done? And really just peer-to-peer resourcing. And what I found through that work is interesting is, again, I have no expertise in this area of sociology, but I sense in myself that I wasn't taught that I could ask for help easily, that I sort of had to figure it out on my own. And so I think that men are taught they can ask for help, actually. And part of the work that I do resourcing women is about that. What do you need? How can you define your needs so that you can communicate it to others and ask for help?
I think that's really, I just want to say something about that, because asking for help is so key to getting things done.
Yeah.
And there is this whole thing with women, that women who ask for help are weak.
Yeah.
And I can say specifically from when I was operating, and I always wanted somebody in the operating room with me. And it wasn't because I didn't know what I was doing, because I could always get through an operation by myself. But, with other people, it's, there's somebody to bounce things off of. And sometimes I would get stuck and I need help, and that's okay. But whenever I did that, there was always a lot of gossip. But when men did that, it was never gossip. It was always, nothing. It was never a problem. And so I just think that that's really it's something I hadn't looked at before. To say, but asking for help, it's not, there's nothing weak there. It's like, how can we get it done faster? The only way you get from point A to point B faster is to learn how somebody else did it. That's
Right.
that's what we teach in the Minnow system. I mean, it's like the reason why we have our programs, our weight loss challenge and our Minnow system, the Minnow Mate program, is because, we can shorten that gap for you. And that's the whole idea. So don't be afraid to ask for help.
Exactly. I mean, I think menopause is a perfect example. I mean, I fear that women are going through this kind of fundamental change and not getting advice, not even asking for help, not even asking their friends, basically.
Right.
Like, yeah, what'd you do? Because did it work? Can you think I could do that? Like whatever. It is incredibly interesting to me that is seen as weakness when actually what it takes to ask for help is a kind of deep sense of confidence and self-worth to say, oh yeah, of course I don't know all the answers. That doesn't mean I'm not smart or fabulous. It just means one can't possibly know everything. And you might know this one particular thing better than me, or have connections to something that could help me with what I want to do. So yeah, I do think that I love hearing what other women need and creating and facilitating rooms where those women can talk about what they need, and that resources can be gathered and harvested and given to that person, so that awesome work can be done. And now's the time to do it.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I just wanted to say that if anybody wants to join the CSA, it's, first of all, this is probably not going to air until the end of the summer, so the CSA will be closed. But can they get on the wait list for your CSA?
I would say get on the wait list for next season. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Glynwood.org if you're in the Hudson Valley, and then for those of you around the country, yeah, just Google your local farms, Google your local CSA, get involved. There's organizations like Glynwood throughout the country that are trying to make this good food movement happen. Yeah. And especially folks that have authority and expertise in the health field. We need you to promote this and bring about this change.
Yeah, and you could still donate to Glynwood if you are so inclined. Glynwood's doing really good work here, but there are probably other nonprofit places around where you live as well. So, Kathleen, thanks so much for joining the Menopause Movement podcast today. I really appreciate it.
So much fun, Michelle. Had a blast. Thank you so much.
Did you know that menopause is not a medical condition? Most doctors don't know this either. I like to say that menopause is the privilege of a long life. And to really take hold of our lives in menopause, we have to unlearn what society and the medical establishment has told us about menopause. This is why I've created this brand new course called Understanding Your Hormones and Managing Your Menopause. I want to show you how you can get on top of your menopause right now so that you can start to see it as the best time of your life. Now, this course is valued at $500 and is in the beta testing phase. And we're currently accepting applications for women to test it out for us at no charge in exchange for feedback and testimonials. But the best part is, because you're a podcast listener, you can bypass the application process and go straight to the front of the line. To register right now, simply visit menopausemovement.com/hormones, and we can get started together right now. Remember, you can get started right now at no charge to you in exchange for feedback and testimonials when you go to menopausemovement.com/hormones. And I'll see you inside the course. Thanks so much for being a part of the Menopause Movement.